I think we all make the world a better place, kind of one person at a time. I'm not prescribing a long walk for every American saying that's going to solve all problems, but if a lot more people went out, looked at other people, got outside of their own little box or their own little tribe or their own little tight community and stretched their own sense of belonging and where they feel that they belong, even if it's not their home ground, the better off I think everybody would be.
In this episode of the RVA Running Man podcast, I speak with Neil King Jr., a former journalist for the Wall Street Journal and author of the book American Ramble, A Walk of Memory and Renewal. American Ramble is a memoir of Neil's 330-mile walk from Washington, D.C. to New York City in the spring of 2021. In the podcast, we discuss what Neil experienced on his journey, what influenced the idea, and how doing it during a time when the country was dealing with the COVID pandemic and political polarization helped influence his journey. I would like to welcome Neil King Jr. To the podcast, former Wall Street Journal reporter of 20 years, the founder and editor of website Gotham Canoe, which is an online journal website dedicated to the life outdoors, and the author of American Ramble, A Walk of Memory and Renewal. The book is a memoir of your 330-mile walk from Washington, D.C. to New York City. The journey took you 26 days to complete. Neil, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I appreciate it, Devin. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. When I first saw your story, it took me back to a couple of years ago during the COVID pandemic, and it embodied me into the spirit that I was in at that moment. And I thought to myself, wow, I would have loved to be a companion with you on your trip going from Washington, D.C. to New York City. So I thought it was amazing. And again, I was exposed to your story by reading your USA Today article, which was
great.
awesome article that you wrote there. And I guess the first question I have for you, since this was kind of in the heat of the pandemic, how difficult was it for you to, plan your walk and B, do it?
Yeah, what was interesting, Devin, is that I was originally going to walk out my door. I think the date was the 26th of March 2020.
Okay.
And then some things started to go all awry in March of 2020, and everybody's lives got upended.
Mm-hmm.
So I watched, of course, all that go flying out the window. Literally people, Airbnb people and others down the road that I had planned to where I was going to stay and people I was going to meet with saying, no, thank you. So I had to put the whole thing off for a year. And, that was a crazy, wild, unfortunate year for so many of us. I then walked out my door almost exactly a year later. I had had my vaccines. We kind of forget maybe a little bit that was that glorious, brief spring when we thought we were coming out of COVID.
Right.
And the numbers were plunging and everything was reopening and people were dropping their masks. And so I walked out into a world where very few people were really on the move yet. They weren't even traveling that much. The airports were still pretty empty, but the Airbnb folks were welcoming me. They actually, like the first night I stayed in an inn about 24 miles from my house up Rock Creek, going directly north from DC.
Mm-hmm.
That couple that ran that B&B kind of place, I don't think they'd had a guest for months, like I was the first one that arrived at their door. So It was a magical, a great time to head out. It was the start of the spring. We thought the COVID was over. It wasn't. We hadn't had Delta, we hadn't had Omicron, but it was a great moment to head out on a big walk like that.
I guess in a way, COVID helped when it came to your lodging. Is that where you're getting at, far as with the Airbnb? Is that where you mainly stayed as you were going along your trip?
I had made the decision that I wasn't going to be carrying a sleeping bag or a tent, and I wasn't going to be camping in the woods or anything. And so you don't actually have a lot of choices. I mean, you're a runner, so you know that a running pace is 8, 9, 10 miles an hour. However, it could be faster if you're going fast, but a walker's pace is 3 miles an hour.
Hmm.
you're, so you got to pick the right places, and you don't really have the luxury to go 5 miles over that way to find a motel, because that's an hour and a half or 2 hours.
Right.
So I had to be very specific about figuring out my route. And for the most part, before I left, I knew where I was going to stay, with a few exceptions, just because I kind of had to. And I also wanted, for the sake of the book and for the sake of the walk being interesting, to meet a whole variety of people along the way.
Hmm.
Um, so not leave everything up to chance. So that also required, that element of planning, and some certainty about where I was going to stay the night.
So where did the idea of the book come prior to your run, or is this something that you thought of as you were doing your, I said run, walk, as you were doing going on your journey? When did you have the idea of doing
Yeah,
your
that's a
book?
good question. It started years and years before, where I just had this crazy idea fell into my head, like, God, what if I walked out my door? I live right by the U.S. Capitol,
Hmm.
9 blocks east of it, and just made my way up as a pedestrian to New York City. What would that be like? It's the most crowded part of the country, I-95, Jersey Turnpike, all that stuff. And, the idea just kind of festered over time, and I became increasingly fascinated in how did the old timers move, before trains and all that. And then I I decided finally that I was going to do it. And then the more I looked at it, the more I read about it, the more I thought about the route in between, the history to be told, going back to the earliest days of America,
Right.
the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the Underground Railroad, all the various things that
Hmm.
one can take a look at. I was like, dang, there's a story to be told here, and there's a book in this. And I kind of called it one of the founding swaths of America, or like the one of, kind of our original heartland.
Hmm.
Well, you live down in Richmond, that's certainly original heartland
Hmm.
area too. So, all those things then made me think, wow, okay, there's some real richness in all this. I'm going to look at it as not just a walk, but as a walk to then try to get a book out of.
Now I know a few years before your run, you got some bad news health wise.
Right.
Um, how difficult, number one, was it dealing with that and recovering from that? Was your health news or your health scare part of what inspired you to take the journey that you went on from DC to New York City?
Yeah, it did actually. I mean, I had a bad cancer diagnosis in 2017, and it was one of those things, you get home and you kind of try to resist the whole Google temptation, but
Yeah.
pretty soon you're wallowing around in the Google world, and then you're like, dang, according to this stuff, I got like, what was it, like 13% chance of being around in 5 years,
Right.
kind of thing. And I was like, ooh, wow, I might like miss, whole decades of my life that I had been kind of counting on.
Hmm.
And so when I beat it back, it took basically 4 years, not like I was laying in a hospital bed. I was doing all kinds of stuff, but I was still fighting the fight. And then I had a bit of a relapse, and that kind of like, oh shit. And
Hmm.
um, and so, it just made things more urgent for me. It also kind of just clarified my vision on a lot of things. It actually had the incredible gift to me of just making the world a more beautiful place. And,
Right.
you know, uh, my appreciation for what it is we have around us just sort of went sky high. And so I walked out the door in a way with that kind of added element of, appreciation for what the world held,
Right.
and desire to go out and take a close, slow look at it.
Right.
Um, so I kind of say that it was my illness and then getting over it, and then it was sort of the national illness and getting out of it. The two of them combined, my
Yeah.
experience, the COVID experience. To be honest, I talk about this a lot, that if I'd walked out my door when I thought I was going to originally, everything that happened in between, not just COVID, the death of George Floyd, the protests,
Hmm.
the riots in some places, you were a witness to the whole huge debate in Richmond. Do these
Yeah.
statues deserve to be here? Should we tear these statues down? And it was just this incredible period, really one of the most amazing stretches in recent American history, where we're looking at our history new. We're thinking of, why is there a Robert E. Lee statue in the middle
Yeah.
of the town? And we're like, no, let's move on. And it made my walk so much more interesting, because I just walked into a different country in a lot of ways, with all these issues on the table in a public way that hadn't really been there before.
Mhm.
well, been there, but not as publicly. And so I wanted to also go out and think about like, okay, who else should we be honoring that we're not even thinking about at all, right? And
Right.
those are the interesting people. Anyway, that's not what you asked about, but so yeah.
No, no, that was great. And I guess going on to or mentioning how we were in a pivotal point in our nation's history during the time that you went on your journey, went on your walk. I know in the article that you wrote, you alluded to your, faith in America being strengthened in during your walk, and the people that you've met, the people that you spoke with. How so? How did your journey cause you to, or give you, I guess, a renewed faith in this country or in the people in this country?
It's a difficult question to answer in a lot of ways because we're all, I think, a bit beaten down by legitimate news of a lot of stuff that's going on, like as we speak, that is disturbing. And I think there's good reason to be worried about where at least a portion of the country is heading
Mm,
and whether it's going to drag us down in ways that we'll all regret, even if we're not really a part of that action at all or
right,
oppose it. And, you know, so there's that. And then there's the go out into the world, walk a stretch of it, base your understanding of what things are on those set of facts that you're encountering day to day. And at least for that time, put the other stuff out of mind that, can also be somewhat abstract, and some media outlets can like make it the world all about that, and just
right.
base my understanding of the world for at least a month on just the stuff I'm seeing. And in that case, man, I met a lot of people that were generous to me. It wasn't like anybody was offering to put me up in their house. We Americans don't
Wow.
do that anymore. But there was all kinds of acts of kindness, and an element of trust, and a giving me that sense that I belonged in some, in their driveway or in some place I walked into their barn or whatever. So that was uplifting for me. And
Right.
but can I then extrapolate and say, therefore, everybody, we're fine, no reason to worry? No. I mean,
Yeah.
I am who I am. I'm one person. People, I probably provoke less, apprehension when they see me walking down the street than they would other people might feel. So,
Yeah.
I hesitate a little bit to make some sweeping judgment about the state of America based on a month-long walk. But what I do argue is that there is another world out there that is filled with a lot more goodness than people might think if you're sitting at home watching TV or looking through the newspapers online or whatever and going, holy shit, it's terrible out there. Um,
Right.
so I find, and I'm sure when you go running and when you're in races and stuff, you see very much what I'm talking about, right? I certainly hope
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, it, Going into your actual walk, what difficulties did you run into out on the road while you were in the midst of walking your 330 miles?
Yeah. Not like tons. I mean, for one, this is, I was never expecting or wanting anybody to necessarily be impressed by this as an athletic feat. I've also
Hmm.
run, what, 6 marathons. I think that's what you've done. I've run the Richmond half marathon. I haven't done
Hmm.
the marathon down there, but I've done two, just a couple in DC and so on and so forth. But, that's, those things are hard. You're gasping for the last 5, 6 miles. Um, this was, I did some days that were similar in mileage to a marathon, but I had the whole day to do it. And, and you,
Right.
but the fascinating thing about long walks like this, and people who do the Appalachian Trail or other really, really long walks will tell you the same thing, that you can do all the training that you do, and you want to do a lot of training, but still the
Mhm.
actual training is the doing. And,
Right.
you get stronger as you go. So the first 3 or 4 days where I really laid out some fairly hefty mileage per day, were kind of, I would like fill up the tub at at the place I was staying in, like soak in it.
Right.
But after a while, you just get more fit, and the days get easier.
Okay.
I didn't have bad. I had some kind of stupid people that were like a little unpleasant, but I
Hmm.
didn't have any outright disagreeable moments where I felt threatened or anything. I was mainly walking along roadsides. This was mainly a go out and meet people, see
Right.
towns, and neighborhoods. This was not like a nature walk kind of thing. If I wanted to do that, I would have probably done the Appalachian Trail or something,
Right.
This was more of a people walk. So,
Now,
but
now,
go ahead.
speaking of the people, who was the most memorable individuals that you met along your journey during your walk?
It was, there were so many people that just cropped up and had amazing things to say. And a lot of the people that have read the book, it's really funny how much they single out this one guy who I only happen to know his first name.
Hmm.
I went back to his house after the walk by car a month later to try to track down more information on him, but his name is Ted. And Ted was his guy just out at the end of his drive, getting his trash can in this, like predominantly black neighborhood in the kind of out in the countryside northwest of Baltimore. And he's out there and he sees me walk along and I say hi to him and he asks me what I'm doing. And I said, I come from Washington and live near the US Capitol.
Hmm.
I'm walking up to New York City on this walk just to kind of get a sense of America and what's happening. And he asked me a couple questions and then he just like launches into this sermon that was so fantastic. It was like, look, this is how I see it. You've gone out to retune yourself and the country's been out of harmony and you're kind of trying to hit the tuning fork and to get yourself into tune. And by doing that, you're going to help resituate the country. And I see this walk of yours as a holy walk and all that stuff. And I'm like, Ted, man, so back off.
Mhm.
Uh, you're putting a lot of weight on my shoulder talking this is calling this a holy walk. But Ted was and when people say, if you could go back out and walk for some length of time with one person you met, who would it be? And I almost always say it would be Ted because he was just a really interesting character. But at one point my phone ran out of batteries and I needed to find some directions to where I was going. And I met this strange, kind of long bearded, I don't know, like Mennonite auctioneer guy in his barn. And he was kind of a funky character with some kind of wild, old time political beliefs about abortion and stuff like that. And, he got kind of on that. But in the end, he was a really interesting character. He had this obsession with old classic tractors that he told me all about, and
Mhm.
he was he auctioned off everything on the face of the earth. And I came to like this guy Ken Keeney, his name was, even though we weren't politically in the same space. But
Mhm.
that's was a lesson from the whole walk that you meet people, you might not necessarily have tons in common, um, you know, uh, in a Facebook kind of Twitter way, but once you're actually talking to them face to face and seeing their world and the other things that interest them, you find something that's fun, charming, whatever about them. Not
All
always,
right.
but hopefully most of the time.
All right. What did uh what did your family and your friends feel about um your journey and your trip? Because obviously you did sure you spoke with your wife and your friends and your brother and what did they feel about your trip?
It was the kind of thing where at the beginning, like, a couple years before when I would say, I've been thinking about walking in New York, people would be like, what? It just kind of it didn't right off the bat make sense to a lot of people because it's like if you want to do a long walk, why would you walk up through this what they consider to be like ugly, congested, you know, walking through Baltimore, walking through Philly, I don't know. But as it developed and as I came to see it for what it was, most people kind of came around to it and were really excited about it. And if you've read some of the book, you'll know that there were
Mhm.
times that I had friends meet me and chunks of it and walk with me. And if we had known each other, it would have been really cool to have you come along for a stretch of it. You know, people came that brought their own knowledge with them about the stretch we were going to walk. I'm talking about like a half day. I had nobody ever walked with me more than 4 or 5 hours, which is fun. I
Mhm.
mean, I wanted to be on my own because when you're on your own is when you have some encounters with people that you wouldn't have if you're with someone else. Um, so, and then, I was doing these daily emails to a whole huge group of people, like 250 people or so as I went. And people were just like completely immersed in that because, you know, not everybody was out and about. Very few people were. And because
Mhm.
of the whole COVID shadow thing, it was like a huge adventure that I was on and everybody wanted to know more about it as I went. So that was kind of cool.
Okay. And it's an excerpt in your book, if you don't mind me
Sure.
reading, that I wanted to kind of bring up. In the very beginning, you have, I kissed my wife, and I want to make sure I'm pronouncing the name right. Shayla, is that correct?
Yeah, Sheila, yeah.
Okay. I kissed my wife, Shayla, said goodbye to my brother Jeff, scratched my Airedale behind the ear, and turned north. I was off to talk to America, to listen to her, to examine her, to wonder over her at what we all hoped was the end of the roughest patches in our history. After taking this journey, what do you think America said back to you?
You know, we've been through a lot for the whole beginning, since the beginning of time, and certainly the beginning of our more modern history. The COVID thing, and when I say COVID, I mean the whole of it, the George Floyd stuff, the bizarre disputed election, the January 6th, all that sort of stuff, has been, an ongoing test to the whole population. And, you know, it we have a resilience about us, a way, and I hope it'll stay this way, of it may take time, but figuring things out. There is, I still think, a genuine baseline goodness that's out there, despite the fact that there's some people that clearly aren't in that camp.
Right.
And part of the walk was really an act of trust, of just put yourself out there and see if people are going to respond and not be unpleasant. And so I say at the end of the book, I'm not, there's thousands, tens of thousands of people drove by me in their cars at 60 miles an hour or whatever. I don't know much about them. I met the people I met. I saw the things I saw. Based on those, I was kind of aglow in a lot of ways for weeks and weeks after that. Part of it though is, I think, because if you go out running, once you get past the 7-8 mile mark or something, your mind starts to find another place. Your spirit finds another place. You have thoughts you wouldn't have had if you hadn't been out doing that run. And the whole walk was like that for me, where I just had that kind of sort of the equivalent of like the runner's high. And even putting aside kind of the political stuff or talking to people, just my own sort of spiritual sense was just really kind of thrown wide open, in part just because I was out walking and looking and thinking for, all that stretch of time. And, that really heightened my faith in the fact that this is this avenue that's available to any of us to
Mhm.
go out, almost this sort of therapeutic thing that you can do for yourself, that just resets your view of the world and of your own, I don't know, your own spirit. So, that too, I think we all make the world a better place, kind of one person at a time, particularly starting with ourselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, uh, I'm not prescribing a long walk for every American, saying that's going to solve all problems. But if a lot more people went out, looked at other people, got outside of their own little box or their own little tribe or their own little tight community, and stretch their own sense of belonging and where they feel that they belong, even if it's not their home ground, the better off I think everybody would be.
What did you learn about yourself after this walk? What was the one thing that you feel that after this journey you added to yourself?
We are extremely distracted people these days. We have these devices that we all carry in our hands, and they contain the entire world, but then again, they don't. And, there's such a value in attentiveness and simplicity. And what made this walk so amazing for me personally, and what kind of created these moments of joy, that were certainly more numerous and more pronounced than I would have in the normal rounds of my life, was just the fact that I had stripped things down to a very simple level and was just out every day, just wanting to pay attention, not to earbuds, not to other people talking in my ear, not to music. I just wanted to go out and see the world and think about things and walk. And that, again, I think that is probably going to be a magical formula to most of us, that we live lives that are just too cluttered,
Mm.
too looking this way, looking that way, paying attention to all these things far away. and we kind of have lost sight of the immediate stuff. And I've seen a few springs. I've been around for more than a few years, and I had never seen a spring as closely as that. I was like, wow, I actually never took the time to watch a spring, like
Right.
what it really is like tree by tree, mile by mile.
Right.
So I guess that's a roundabout way of just saying, I realize that there are all these reservoirs of joy inside all of us that we don't really tap all that well. And doing a walk like this, or even doing a lot of running, like I know you're big on, it taps that joy,
Right. Okay. Well, Neil, your journey that you took 330 miles in 26 days was, from my perspective, very inspiring. And, do you have anything new or anything close to this that you're planning in the future?
Yeah, I'm trying to do or I am doing a lot of thought on the next book I want to do, and it's not necessarily going to be a walk out my door, do a long walk book, but I do want to do something built around a lot of kind of explorations into, I don't know, 12 to 14 different parts of America.
Hmm.
And I'm still trying to piece out some things about how that might come together. And so that's definitely going to be based on some stretches of walking. Because I just think there's a lot of value in doing both the reading and the kind of scholarship stuff and trying to tell some of our history and stuff with the up close, immediate looking at things and doing it slowly.
Right.
And so I've got some stuff I'm going to be doing at the end of the year along those lines.
Well, Neil King Jr., author of American Ramble, a walk of memory and renewal. Thank you for joining the podcast, and keep walking, keep running, and keep us posted.
Same back to you, Devin. It's a real pleasure to talk, and I'm glad I had the chance to do it.
Thanks again to Neil King Jr. for being a part of this episode. If you'd like to learn more about Neil's journey, please visit his website at neilkingjr.com. If you like this content that you just heard, please subscribe to my podcast and my YouTube channel. You can find me on YouTube by searching at RVA Running Man. You should be able to find me pretty easily. Or you can follow me at my website, which is www.rvarunningman.com. And until next time, please be safe on the roads and trails, runners. I'll talk to you later. Peace.